development model for the region that will recognize that the business models have changed, and at the possibility of a ferry service, Mr. Speaker. That is the responsible thing for a government to do. What is not responsible is to continue to put money into a money-losing operation with no chance of sustainability, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Hants West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question through you is to the Minister of Health and Wellness. In late October, the Nurses Union voted to adopt a common uniform for all nurses across the province. Some specialties have been excluded from the change, but by and large, all nurses will now be outfitted in black pants or skirts and a white blouse. The government announced that this transition will come with an estimated cost of $500,000 a year, which will be the responsibility of the district health authorities. Mr. Speaker, my question through you to the Minister of Health and Wellness. What will the procurement process for the businesses interested in being a supplier of these new uniforms be?
Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I believe that the union procurement or the uniform procurement will happen at the district health authority level, but I will be I'd certainly be happy to look into that for the honourable member and provide him with additional information.
The honourable member for Hants West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Hens Uniforms, located in my hometown of Windsor, sells scrubs to local healthcare workers. Hens sells their scrubs in every pattern and frequently does special orders for customers on request. Given recent changes, they could see quite a drop in sales without the opportunity to supply the new uniforms to local nurses. My question to the Minister, will Hens Uniforms and suppliers elsewhere in the province have a fair opportunity to bid when tenders come out for these respective uniforms?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as I indicated, I'd be very happy to look into this matter for the honourable member and provide him with information. If there is a tendering process that goes with the uniforms, there would be no exclusion of any local businesses such as the one that he's referring to. I can't imagine.
The honourable member for Hants West on his final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister for that clarification, and we certainly want that local business to have the opportunity. The recent 3% cut for the district health authorities in this province has put a great deal of pressure on them. A number of officials from health authorities around the province have expressed their concern over their budget cuts and the impact it will have on patient care. My final question to the Minister, the district health authorities are cutting frontline people. At a time like this, how does the Minister expect them to deal with a $500,000 expenditure on top of everything else?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The issue around nurses' uniforms was brought to the bargaining table by the nurses' union. The employers that were at the table accepted the proposal. I don't know all of the details, but my recollection is that a monetary amount will be transferred to individual nurses so that they would be, because they purchase their own uniforms. But as I indicated to the honourable member, I'd be more than happy to look into this with respect to the company in his area and provide him with additional information.
The honourable member for Bedford Birch Cove.
Mr. Speaker, today is the National Day of Remembrance and Action on Violence Against Women. All over Canada, people are remembering the 14 young women who were murdered during the École Polytechnique massacre in 1989, murdered simply because they were women. While we've come a long way when it comes to women's equality, we still have a long way to go. Nova Scotia has the highest rate of sexual assault and some of the lowest charge, conviction, and sentencing rates in Canada. 44% of victims of sexual assault are under the age of 25. And in 65% of sexual assault cases reported to Halifax Regional Police in 2007, 65% of those victims knew the accused. During their lifetime, 83% of women with disabilities will be sexually assaulted. Mr. Speaker, this is unconscionable. Earlier this year, we finally saw an increase in the core funding for the Avalon Sexual Assault Centre. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister responsible for the status of women, What concrete steps will this government take now to specifically prevent and reduce the rate of sexual assault and rape?
The Honourable Minister of Labour and Advanced Education and Status of Women.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Certainly this morning in the Red Room, we were joined by a number of women, representatives from women's groups and marginalized communities. And I just want to say that the government takes the issues raised by the honourable member very, very seriously. We are actively working within government to implement over 31 of the recommendations that were directed by the Domestic Violence Task Force towards government. We've also have well underway our consultations with community-based organizations so that we have a more collaborative effort to work on these issues. These societal issues have arisen over generations, and certainly that's no excuse, but I think we all appreciate it's going to take time and resources to work together on them, and we are committed to aggressively taking on that task. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Bedford Birch Cove on her first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, victims of sexual assault often say they are victimized twice, once by their aggressor and again because of the lack of services that are made available to them. Rape can have a devastating effect on women and their families. For many, the only way to start the healing process is through therapy and psychological counseling. Victims of sexual assault in Nova Scotia are not able to access the services they need. In fact, victims in rape in Nova Scotia can wait over 6 months to access counseling. The situation is dire in rural communities. Mr. Speaker, my question for the Minister of the Status of Women is this: how will this government ensure that services for victims of sexual assault are immediately available for women across Nova Scotia?
The Honourable Minister of Labour and Advanced Education and Minister for responsible for the Status of Women.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I explained this morning in my presentation in the Red Room, we're taking a multi-pronged approach to this. We are providing, enhancing support services for women and families who undergo violence, but certainly we're also looking at the prevention side of things, and we will shortly be launching a new strategy called Neighbours, Friends and Family, whereby we will raise awareness in the province that it's everyone's responsibility when they hear about or are told about a case where a woman has suffered violence or is under the threat of abuse, and that we all have a responsibility to bring that to the attention of the authorities, both in terms of consequences for the abuser, but also to provide interventions and support for the woman involved. And certainly this is a societal issue, and we all have to take responsibility in ending violence against women. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Bedford Birch Cove.
Mr. Speaker, organizations that serve victims of sexual assault, and I'm talking about sexual assault, a subsection of domestic violence, which the Minister was speaking about, they're facing increasing funding pressures. Like all Nova Scotians, they're dealing with increasing power rates, high fuel costs, and high taxes. Simply put, women's community-based services are underfunded and understaffed. And when they do access funding, they can only secure funding for 1 year at a time, making future planning extremely difficult. Mr. Speaker, given that Nova Scotia has the highest rate of sexual assault in the country, will the minister responsible for the status of women commit today to ensuring that women's organizations get the multi-year funding they require to best meet the needs of women in their communities?
The Honourable Minister responsible for the Status of Women.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our government is taking a very balanced approach. We are putting in place the 3-year strategy We've in the past provided additional funding to transition houses and to the Avalon Sexual Assault Center. In fact, our department has provided money to do a pilot project so that they can document the approach they're using, and that can be a model for other communities across this province. We're working very closely with our community-based service deliverers, and we certainly recognize the value of the work they're doing, and within our means, we are doing everything possible to support them in their efforts. Thank you.
The honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Finance. Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Finance has the control and supervision of the Victims Assistance Fund as set out in Section 11(1) of the Victims' Rights and Services Act. Now, that fund comes from victims' fine surcharge that's collected by the Department of Justice on all the fines in this province. The Section 11(5) of the Victims' Rights and Services Act states very clearly that the Minister of Finance shall annually make a report to the House of Assembly showing the condition of the fund, unquote. Mr. Speaker, my question to the Minister is, when was the last time that the Minister tabled a report on the condition of the Victims' Assistance Fund?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I have to tell the member honestly that in the time that I've been the minister, this is not a subject that has been raised with me inside or outside the Department of Finance. It's a good question. I ought to be able to get the information to members, so I'll take it under advisement.
The honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park on her first supplementary.
Thank you. I appreciate the answer. Mr. Speaker, the minister may be aware that this is a subject that I've been asking questions about both at public accounts and through freedom of information requests. We've been trying to find out more about the funds that are collected and how they're dispersed. The only information that we were able to find that's public at the moment was the volume 2 of the public accounts last year, which just gives a balance sheet for that fund. It's only a snapshot. It doesn't show how the funds were used, what services are available to victims from that money, etc. I will table that, though. Perhaps the minister could start with having a look at that. My question to the minister really is, why has it been neglected for so long to have annual reports on the state of this fund?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have no information on this particular subject available to me. I'll take the question under advisement. I'll be happy to get back to the member and the House.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Clayton Park on her final supplementary.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, that is a good answer. I'd like the minister today to commit to bringing in a full report on the condition of that fund, similar to the reporting that we see on all the other trust funds that are held by the province. We do get those on a regular basis here. So my question to the minister is, will he commit to doing so as soon as possible?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What I will commit to doing is taking it under advisement, finding out what is going on with this particular matter, which has not been brought to my attention before in any way during my 2.5 years as minister, and I'll be happy to report back to the member and the House.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, on August the 16th, when the government finally released its long overdue Natural Resources Strategy, we learned the fluffy, non-technical definition of a clear cut. Mr. Speaker, it's almost a full year since this government announced a 50% reduction in clear-cutting targets, and we still do not have a technical definition of what a clear cut is. Mr. Speaker, my question through you is to the minister. Will the minister admit that his half-hearted performance has created uncertainty for this important industry, and will he release the final technical definition of a clear cut for this vital industry, which is now in turmoil?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, we certainly understand Nova Scotia's concern with the amount of clear cutting that's been going on in this province for far too long. That's why we brought forth the Natural Resources Strategy, the path we share. And part of our initiative and part of our action plan is to reduce clear cutting to 50% within 5 years. That the clock is now ticking on that 5-year period. And we fully agree that we have to reduce the amount of clear cutting in the province. We have a layman's definition. We're working on a technical definition, and I'll give you further details on those, I'm sure, as we go along in this answer sequence.
Member for Cape Breton West on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, I mean, even this minister, after this length of time, with the very capable staff that he has, should be able to come up with a definition of clear cutting. Now, Mr. Speaker, it is those people on that side of the House who have said they're going to reduce something by 50%. But like a lot of things they do, they have no idea what it was they're reducing. Now, Mr. Speaker, at the release of the Natural Resources Strategy launch, Andrew Fedora, an executive director of the Federation of Nova Scotia Woodlot Owners, said, and I quote, "It is a little frustrating because we have been working on this for over 3 years and there is still no definite answers in terms of what is a clear cut in the province and how specifically will this impact landowners in this province," end quote. Tony Rogers, executive director of the Nova Scotia Federation of Anglers and Hunters, said about the strategy that, and I quote, "It looked academic and soft," end of quote. And I'll table those. So, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, my question to you is to the minister is this. Will the minister admit that he had more than enough time to give a clear, technical definition and terms of reference to the stakeholders who were impacted by this strategy, but he even failed to even provide the technical definition of clear cut?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm glad the honourable member recognizes the quality of the and expertise of the staff we have within the Department of Natural Resources. Thank you for recognizing that. And those department staff have been working hard on a technical definition. We have a layman's definition, which, as you mentioned, was in the Natural Resources Strategy, the removal of all trees from an area except for those required under the wildlife or watercourse regulations. And the technical definitions, a member mentioned a number of groups. We've consulted with them. We're working with them through our chief forester in the province, and we're getting the proper answers. But it's a complicated issue in some ways around basal area and around the number of trees per hectare and the ecosystem management. But I can assure you that it's fully being worked on.
The honourable member for Cape Breton West on his final supplementary.
You know, Mr. Speaker, it's a shame that that department which has such quality individuals doesn't have the same quality leadership. Mr. Speaker, the government has a reputation for targeting small business and industries in rural Nova Scotia, and the small woodlots are no exception. The Federation of Nova Scotia Woodlot Owners, along with many other important groups, have been more than patient through this exercise, but Andrew Fedora says there really hasn't been a process, and since the launch of the Natural Resources Strategy, he has seen no definite action from this government. None, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's typical of this government to create targets and laws through consulting with little or no regard for the impact on the economy or the families of this province. Mr. Speaker, my final question through you to the minister is, will he release the technical definition of a clear cut and stop dithering with the livelihood of those in this very vital Nova Scotia industry?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, for years and decades, really, in this province, we've had clear-cutting unchecked, and it's gone on under Conservative governments for many, many years. And this government now has a plan to change that. We've set a goal of 50% within 5 years. We have an action plan. We have a natural resources strategy. We're going to change it. We're not going to let it happen any longer.
The Honourable Member for Kings West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, Nova Scotians learned of yet another code census at both the QE2 and the Dartmouth General. Mr. Speaker, these aren't patients clogging the emergency department because they have the sniffles. These are patients who arrived at the emergency room, were deemed sick enough to be admitted to a hospital bed, and there were no beds available. In fact, Mr. Speaker, from November 2010 to November 2011, there were 93 code census calls at the QE2 and 173 at Dartmouth General. My question to the Minister of Health and Wellness, given the frequency of code census at our largest tertiary hospital over the last year, when is addressing this problem going to become a priority?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, indeed, improving emergency care services all over the province is a priority. This government has invested literally millions of dollars into emergency care services in the last 2.5 years, from one end of the province to the other end of the province, Mr. Speaker. And we are seeing significant improvements in emergency care across our province. Literally thousands of Nova Scotians have been diverted from emergency departments as a result of very strategic investments. And we have a plan, and we will continue to implement this plan, and we will see great improvements in the emergency care system, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Kings West on his first supplementary.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. We're not in the peak of flu season. The last time I checked, there wasn't an accumulation of ice on the ground to cause an increase in the number of falls. In fact, Mr. Speaker, 2 years ago, September 30th, 2009, when a code census was reported, the minister stated, and I quote, and I'll table the document, Mr. Speaker, when I'm finished, "I'm very concerned about it. Our government is concerned about it. We have a lack of bed capacity on the floors above the emergency room." My question to the minister, if the minister knew about the problem and the root cause of the problem in 2009, how come nothing has been done to fix it?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. A number of things have been done. We have put advanced care paramedics in the Capital District Health Authority into nursing homes, for example. This has meant that less seniors are going to our emergency rooms and waiting for hours for care that can be provided in long-term care. We have just awarded a contract for a new bed management system. Mr. Speaker, this will make a tremendous amount of difference in terms of identifying flow issues in our largest tertiary care system, and will result in less pressure. We have invested in a rapid assessment unit, which literally has diverted thousands of people out of the emergency department, Mr. Speaker. And we will continue, as I said, to make smart, strategic investments that will result in significant improvements in our emergency care system, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Kings West on his final supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the minister may have addressed a faster assessment process, but guess what? That doesn't address the fact there are no beds. Mr. Speaker, when I reviewed the headlines around the issue of code census at the QE2, I have to say it felt like Groundhog Day. January 2004 headlines reads, "Plan not going to fix ER woes. Nurses, doctors fear biggest problem. Lack of inpatient beds still not addressed." My final question, how many more warnings does this minister need before she gets around to addressing the problem?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness. Order, please. The time allotted for all questions put by members to ministers has ended. I will also like to address an issue that I heard during question period. The chair clearly heard the honourable member for Yarmouth accuse the Premier of being a liar. Such an accusation is clearly unparliamentary, and I ask the honourable member to rise and withdraw his remarks.
Mr. Speaker, I will apologize to the Premier and you for using unparliamentary language and withdraw that remark. I do maintain when it comes to the truth. The Premier has been fast and loose with it, though. I withdraw the unparliamentary language.
I will now recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I wish you now leave the chair and the House resolves off the whole House on bills.
An introduction also by the Honourable Member for the Honourable Minister for Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased this afternoon to introduce in our East Gallery some gentlemen that are heavily involved with electricity mobility, electric transportation. I'd ask them to rise as I read their names. First of all, David Swan, the President of DHS Engineering in Nova Scotia and a board member for Electric Mobility Canada. Al Cormier, President and CEO of Electric Mobility Canada. Phil Patsinis, President and CEO of Electric General Motors, Government General Relations Manager, I'm sorry. And finally, Jamie McNeil, Nova Scotia Powers. I'd ask you to give them a warm welcome here this afternoon.
We welcome all our guests to the gallery and hope that they enjoyed today's proceedings. I will now recognize the Honourable Member for Bedford Birch Cove on an introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to introduce two distinguished visitors to the West Gallery. They tell me they're distinguished. We have we have two federal members of Parliament with me. The member for Kings Hants, Scott Bryson. And the member who apparently told the member for Argyll that when he heard the tone I was using during question period, he thought he was in trouble. The member for Halifax West, Jeff Regan.
We welcome all our guests to the gallery and hope that they've enjoyed today's proceedings. I will now recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Speaker, again, I wish you now leave the chair and the House resolves off the whole House on bills.
Thank you. All those in favour say aye. All those against say nay. Motion is carried. We will now take a short pause to go into the Committee of the Whole House on bills.
please. The Committee of the Whole House on Bills will come to order. I recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Madam Chair, could you please call Bill 102?
I now call Bill number 102. We're on clause number 1. I recognize the Honourable Member for Inverness. And for your information, you have another hour. The clock resets for you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And pleased to have another opportunity today to speak to the title of this bill. And you know, when we look at the title, where it references protect the economy, this is about Bill 102, protecting the economy.
Wrong clause.
Madam Chair, you know, when we look at that, you know, it's talking about, actually I want to focus on where it talks about preventing unnecessary labor disruptions. And when we consider the word prevent, and the fact that we've had very, very few labor disruptions in the province in recent years, Madam Chair, how can we use the word prevent when we don't have any unnecessary labor disruptions to prevent? These are things that just don't happen. And they haven't been happening here in Nova Scotia. So preventing them is absurd. The title of this bill is absurd, and it reminds me of a few things, Madam Chair. One would be a waterproof towel. Now, a waterproof towel doesn't make much sense. Or how about a screen door on a submarine? Or how about an inflatable dartboard? That doesn't make much sense either. So language is a funny thing. And, you know, Madam Chair, let's take a look at the timeline. First, the NDP told us, don't worry about Bill 100. There's nothing to see in the bill that should be of concern to anybody. But buried in that bill was succession rights and a new Labour Management Review Committee without non-union representation. So, Madam Chair, the government purposely left off non-union employer representation, the very people that employ 85% of the workers in the province. So the government continued to say there's nothing to worry about. They said this is about unionized workers, and they told all those non-union employers that this doesn't apply to you. But then, lo and behold, came the whispers about first contract arbitration. And I know I've heard it since then, Madam Chair, of many members on the government side, that this has nothing to do with non-unionized workplaces. But, you know, when we talk about first contract arbitration, the Labour Management Review Committee itself could not agree on it and gave no consensus to the minister. Well, didn't seem to matter. The government went ahead with it anyway. And they're, you know, in a sense, Madam Chair, they're negotiating in bad faith themselves. They're doing everything they would define as bad bargaining. They're not listening. The government is not listening to the employers. We saw them come in at law amendments, and we saw members opposite question them and suggest that, well, they just didn't really understand what the legislation was about, and it's just fear-mongering. But, Madam Chair, these people are educated people. They know their businesses. They have hired help, sometimes very well-appointed and expensive hired help to look at these things and review them and to determine if there's going to be a risk to their business. And, Madam Chair, those businesses came forth at law amendments and told this government, we do not want Bill 102. But it doesn't seem to matter. It doesn't seem to matter. And so, you know, the government is not listening, and they're telling people one thing when they talked about that the Labour Management Review Committee wasn't going to impact non-unionized places, but then they're doing the opposite. And they're misrepresenting the facts. And in my case, they're not ordering enough lunch. So, Madam Chair, let's look at Michelin. We have a lot of talk about Michelin, and their North American president, Dana LeBlanc, had visited law amendments, and we certainly took notice of the media when he came on the scene. Now, I know many people at home today weren't here the day when the president of Michelin North America came here to the legislature, but I can tell you there was great buzz. There was great fanfare. We were looking out the doors of the chamber. The media was all centered on this gentleman who had come in, recognizing how many people in this province are employed by Michelin, and recognizing Michelin as, I think, a pretty good employer. I've never really heard any complaints about Michelin, how they treat their workers. They're competing in a global industry. They make good tires. I've owned a few sets of Michelins myself. And, you know, we know our plants here in Nova Scotia are manufacturing tires that are sent all over the world. Proof that Nova Scotia can be competitive in global marketplaces. So here's a company that's happy to do business here and is doing business here, and they're coming in and saying, wait, we don't want Bill 102. To me, Madam Chair, there should be a buzz in the legislature, and we should be interested in what that gentleman has to say, and I think we should be heeding his advice. His company has a vested interest in Nova Scotia. We hope that that will continue. I would want, as an elected member, even though I don't have a Michelin plant in my area, I would want a company like that to be happy about their future in Nova Scotia and to feel like, as an elected representative, that I'm supportive of what they need to have to keep selling tires around the world, keep selling tires around the world that are made in Nova Scotia. So Michelin is a non-union employer. They sustain 3,500 good-paying jobs in 3 rural Nova Scotia communities, in Lunenburg, Kings, and Pictou counties. These are the only Michelin plants in Canada, Madam Chair. So when Michelin first came to Nova Scotia in 1969, the coal and steel industries in Cape Breton were still a big employer. And, you know, when Michelin came in, it helped to diversify the economy. And, you know, I would love to see Michelin maybe expand into the Strait area at some point. We have a lot of people who are, whose employment, they may be being displaced at this time. I'm certainly hopeful with New Page that most of those people will get to return to work in their hometown, in their home area. But I know there's a lot of people beyond those people that are away working who would probably love a chance to come home to work for a good company like Michelin. And wouldn't it be great, Madam Chair, if Michelin saw had the faith in the economy in Nova Scotia and in the government of Nova Scotia and in the decisions that government Nova Scotia is making to maybe add another plant here in the province. Now, I'm sure they may, if they were looking at their plants, they're probably more apt to expand existing locations. But certainly, imagine another plant of 700 people in the Strait area, what that would do for the economy, not just for Port Hawkesbury, the community, one of the communities I represent, but also for Richmond County, for Antigonish and Guysborough, that I know are represented currently by government sitting members in this legislature. So I think, you know, why wouldn't those members listen to somebody like Michelin and respect what they have to say, and respect that Michelin and these people that go to bat for Nova Scotia when they go to their national and international meetings for their Michelin company, why not respect what they have to say? And why not say, well, you know what, these people who are creating jobs here, maybe we should be listening to them. And maybe instead of just blindly passing a piece of legislation that they don't want, maybe we should be asking them what kinds of legislation should we be passing that they do want. We might end up getting more Michelin jobs in Nova Scotia. So let's see what Michelin thinks of the NDP's first contract arbitration. The president, well, I think we should let Michelin come in and tell us what they need. I'd love to hear what Michelin needs to create a new plant in Nova Scotia. Might be another 700 jobs.
Stability is the first thing.
Might help to diversify the economy of the Strait area. And I'm sensing, Madam Chair, that there's a lot of interest in other areas, because I'm hearing some of the members say they'd like to have Michelin set up in their area. And I'm sure Michelin would have a just as good experience in other areas of the province as well. But when Michelin, when their North American Vice President came to see us here in the legislature through the Law Amendments Committee, he said that we are opposed to first contract legislation for a number of reasons. Most importantly, an employer needs to be able to say no to any proposal it cannot afford. So, Madam Chair, what sense, and I'll just stop with the quote there, what sense would it make for this government to pass legislation? I mean, what does this government know about Michelin's competitive environment for making tires? I would say they probably don't know a lot. In my own humble opinion, I probably don't know a lot, Madam Chair. I might be able to surmise a few of the competitive impacts they face. But, you know, I think Michelin knows what's best for Michelin. And by extension, that's been a good thing for Nova Scotia. Because what's good for Michelin is good for the workers that working at Michelin. Because if Michelin can stay competitive in the world and make tires that people want to buy elsewhere, because they're made here under the cost mechanisms we have here, that means that Michelin's looking out for people in Nova Scotia and is maintaining jobs in Nova Scotia, especially in rural Nova Scotia. It's much easier to create jobs in the urban areas, Madam Chair, and we see that all the time. Companies want to locate to more urban areas. But rural areas where Michelin is located, very difficult. Very rare to see companies wanting to set up in a rural area, especially at this point in time. One of the most important things I think we can do, Madam Chair, is retain the businesses that we do have in rural Nova Scotia. So, Michelin went on to say, the President went on to say that the present law that's being put forward through Bill 102 will allow an arbitrator to go in and really impose upon a company a proposal that it may not be able to afford, thus throwing out the business model for making tires in Nova Scotia because maybe it's no longer competitive. And with the stroke of a pen somewhere far away from Nova Scotia, the company could decide, let's make our investment somewhere else, Madam Chair. Let's make our investment in another province or perhaps another country where labor is cheaper, where cost structures are cheaper that allow us to bring us tires to market cheaper. So, Madam Chair, who would win? Who would win with Bill 102 in a scenario like that? You know, would the people who want to redistribute wealth away from these companies into the hands of the people benefit? Well, Madam Chair, if the companies are no longer here and don't exist anymore, there wouldn't be much money left to redistribute. So, Michelin needs, and this is what the President said, Michelin needs that to protect our present and future assets. Michelin had said, most importantly, the employer needs to be able to say no to any proposal it cannot afford. The present law permits that. Michelin needs that to protect our present and future assets. No law can artificially change the reality that an employer cannot pay more than it can afford. So that's right out of the President of Michelin, right out of the mouth of the President of Michelin. He also went on to say, second, first contract arbitration is a well-known union organizing tool to help organizers downplay or distort the realities of collective bargaining for employees. So, Madam Chair, that's been a bone of contention in here, and we've heard people on the government side, members on the government side say, well, you know, why are you opposing this? This only has to do with unionized workplaces. But the point that the President of Michelin North America here is making, and it's a very relevant point, is that now union organizers will have a tool to use to encourage unionization of Michelin, which, you know, Madam Chair, if somebody's working there, if they didn't know any better, they might think, hey, great, I'm going to get a bigger paycheck. I may get some other kinds of benefits. But, Madam Chair, everybody wants that. And I often said, I've said it probably 10 times now, I would never begrudge somebody for wanting a bigger paycheck. But what good does that do if it puts the company in a position where it's not a profitable investment for Michelin? And Michelin decides to take the company away from Nova Scotia and the jobs are gone. If these people that are so supportive of Bill 102, like organized labor, want to give people higher wages, why not become an entrepreneur? Why not get involved in a business, maybe take over an existing business? There's no law preventing that, Madam Chair. And if they chose to pay their employees more, so be it. Nobody would stop them. They would also then have to realize, though, that the products they're making, in order to sell them, have to be competitive with other areas. And then they might start to appreciate somebody like the President of Michelin North America when he said the words that I've just said here. So, Madam Chair, we don't need to be in here putting legislation in the books with respect to this. I mean, people out there, Nova Scotians, it's a free country, it's a free province. People want to start a business. If people feel that they can do a better job of giving workers a better quality of life on the job, start a company. Give the employees what you'd like to see them have. And I would advance to you, Madam Chair, that Michelin in Nova Scotia is a good example of an employer who does a great job with its employees. And the fact that unions have not been able to establish themselves at Michelin is proof that Michelin is a good employer, cares about its employees, and treats them fairly. So if somebody out there wants Bill 102, and if somebody out there doesn't feel like Michelin is treating their employees nicely, why don't they go out and start a tire manufacturer in Nova Scotia? But sadly, Madam Chair, the people that advocate for this kind of thing are not leaders, because they have the free will, there's nobody stopping them. They just don't choose to go out and do this kind of thing because I think in their heart of hearts they know that it's not as easy as they think it is. And if it was, I guess they'd be doing it, Madam Chair. And I'm seeing a member opposite and looking at me in shocked disbelief. And I'd be happy to hear him champion an opportunity. If he sees that there's an opportunity to manufacture tires in the province, maybe to advance a business plan and to go and get financing for that kind of an arrangement, I would love to see that. Because, Madam Chair, that would be job creation in Nova Scotia, and that's exactly what we need in the province. So, really, in a way, Madam Chair, this bill is moving in the exact opposite direction of the direction we need to go. That is, if we want to create jobs in the province, and if we want to maintain an economy in rural Nova Scotia. So, Madam Chair, I had a conversation with somebody recently, and they were saying, you know, they thought one of the biggest issues right now is the state of rural Nova Scotia and where is it going? Because we have a lot of retired people living in the rural areas of the province, a lot of younger people moving into the city, into the capital of Halifax. But this person was saying, you know, the retired people, the seniors, they're really starting to notice, they're starting to wonder what's going to happen here. All the young people are gone. What's going to happen to us when we need people to look after us? Is there going to be anybody here left in the area to look after us? And it might sound like an exaggeration, Madam Chair, but I know when I look at my old high school yearbooks, there's not too many people that are still around. So, you know, so again, Madam Chair, I submit to you and to all members of the legislature, if somebody wants to pay workers more, if that's what this bill is really about, why not go out, pick the business that you think is not paying workers what they should be paid, start the business, pay your workers what you want to pay them, and let's be done with it. Instead, with this government choosing to push ahead with Bill 102, what you're really saying to these employers in the province, who a lot of them are just hard-working people that are really no different than the workers who work for them. Some of these owners, business owners, work more hours than their own workers at the business because they have to, just to break even, to make a profit, and to make payroll. So if the government is so intent on pushing ahead with this Bill 102, you know, really what you're saying to those employers is, we don't care. We don't care about your business. We also support people who don't care enough to take the time to start a business. We support people who just want to go in and tell you what to do, irregardless of what that's going to mean for your company, irregardless if that means that it's going to mean lost jobs. Well, irregardless. I've just been corrected, Madam Chair, and I must humbly accept that I am to be corrected. I should be saying regardless. So regardless, the government, and I'm getting thumbs up now, so regardless of what it's going to mean for these companies, for the government to plow ahead with that, it's really, with Bill 102, it's really saying to them that we don't care. We're just, you know, that's something for you to deal with. We're going to let an arbitrator come in and look at your business and make decisions for you, whether you like it or not. You're going to have to accept them, and we don't really care. We don't really care if that's going to impact whether or not you can keep employing the same number of people you employ today, because they may have to reduce the number of employees if there's changes in the cost structure of the business. The government is saying, we don't really care that you might have your, really all of your pension plan tied up in your business because you don't have a pension plan, because it's your business. So the government is telling those people, we don't care if your pension is cut in half, because that business owner is going to depend on the sale of the business to generate the pot of money that's going to be used to supply income for that person when they sell the business. So, Madam Chair, that's sad. And, you know, people can say this is politics that I'm getting up here, but you know, I've just talked about Michelin, and what's true for Michelin is also true for a lot of other employers in the province, really for every employer in the province. And according to the numbers of people that we saw come forward at law amendments and the variety of businesses and industry sectors in our economy that were represented, it's pretty obvious that things that are affecting Michelin are also affecting them. So, Mr. LeBlanc, the president of Michelin North America, made a couple of points. He used the word reality or realities twice in those first 2 points. So there might be a message in that, Madam Chair, for the government. This is reality we're talking about here. Now, I suppose in a couple of days' time, Madam Chair, this bill will be passed, and I can only assume that it will, because I don't think my remarks today are having any impact on the members of the government, at least in terms of changing their vote. I fully expect they will support the legislation, and it's disappointing because all these employers have come forward and talked about what it could mean for them, and it really means a lot of negative things for them. So the reality is, it looks like the government is probably going to just push this through. So the third point that the president of Michelin made, he said that the Minister of Labour has acknowledged that Nova Scotia enjoys a harmonious labour environment, and there is nothing which has triggered the need for first contract arbitration. So we are left questioning, why has this bill been introduced at this time of economic uncertainty? And Madam Chair, what the President is saying here is that with the collapse in the financial markets in 2008 and the bursting of the housing bubble in North America and other parts of the world, there's great uncertainty in the economy. People aren't spending as much. And I think it would be safe to say, Madam Chair, that the economy was really juiced up on a lot of free-flowing money that was really being carelessly flowed about through extremely low interest rates, very weak terms given out to people who wanted to borrow money to buy homes. So there's a lot of money out there in the economy that shouldn't have been out there. It was really creating a false economy. And of course, everybody got caught up in this because if you could own a house and virtually pay nothing down on the house, and you're paying hardly any interest on the mortgage to own that house, well, there's very little cost to you, very little impact on your monthly cash flow to own the house. That means there's all kinds of money for other things, such as tires. And I respect that. I suppose people don't just buy tires because they want tires. They probably buy them when they wear them out. But, Madam Chair, they might be driving their automobiles more frequently because they're probably feeling rich, you know, because they've... so there was a lot of money flowing about in the economy. Well, and there's many, and I won't touch that one. The Minister of Economic Development, I won't touch that one. I want to be polite today. But suffice it to say, there's an awful lot of money pouring around in the economy. Times were good. A lot of companies were benefiting from this, but then all of a sudden, the knees were cut out from the economy, and to the point of the President of Mission North America, you know, we're now in a time of great uncertainty. There's a lot of companies that aren't making near the money that they were making before the collapse in the economy. So why make these changes now? If the Minister has said that there's already a harmonious relationship with Labour in the province, between Labour and employers in the province, why be putting this forth now? We've heard them say, well, you know, now is the best time to put it forward because there's no controversy right now, there's no Labour disputes right now. And you know, Madam Chair, I can't help but think the reason that they're putting it forward now is not to solve a problem, because there's none to be solved. 3 disputes in 14 years is insignificant. But I think the reason they're putting it forward is because there's people that they want to be supportive of, who were supportive of them. And we saw the Labour movement give big donations to the NDP in the last election. And they were even called to account on it. They were even called to account on it, though. In fact, they were found guilty of giving over the prescribed amount that was allowed to give, and they had to pay it back. And then there was a delay in paying it back, which caused further embarrassment. So Madam Chair, and well, that's a good, yeah, actually, I get some donations from business. I get some donations from small business in my community, small businesses that create jobs. And I'm happy to represent them here. And it was, as a good member pointed out, those donations were made legally, which is quite different from organized labor. And, you know, and the member says, I don't like unions. Well, you know, unions, no question, have brought some wealth for people in the province. But what we're talking about here today is if we unionize every employer and we start losing and holidays, and my father used to work a 6-day work week and it moved back to 5 days. But you know what else? We're not also in the day of the company store anymore either, Madam Chair. And if we go to and please send it to me, but you know, if we pass this Bill 102, and let's say there's mass unionization across all sectors of the economy, we're probably going to be looking at mass layoffs and mass loss of jobs. And I say it again, I would never begrudge somebody from earning a bigger paycheck, but Madam Chair, it has to be done inside the context of ensuring that the business that's paying those wages can still compete in a global marketplace. We're all on the internet nowadays, and you know, we're all on the internet. We realize how global our world is and how everything is interconnected, and how most of the things we buy, if we look on the back of the object, it says made in China. Well, there's a reason it's made there. One, because we've chosen to buy it there, because we want to buy goods that are cheap, because we want to all make the most of our dollar, and that's true for members on all sides of the House. But two, places like China have completely different cost structures than we have here in Nova Scotia. So when we're still making tires in 2011 in Nova Scotia, that makes me happy, Madam Chair, because it gives me some hope that we can still compete against places like China. But when the government brings in Bill 102 and Michelin comes in and says, we don't want this, that causes me concern. And I think it's causing a lot of other Nova Scotians concern. And, you know, I really wish, Madam Chair, and I don't think it's going to happen, but I really wish that the members opposite would think about that. And, you know, I've said it before. I've stood here and said it before. If the government chose to pull this bill and say we need to consult more with people in the province about this bill and whether or not we should be putting it forward, I would quietly take my place. In fact, if they all said they do it now, I would. But I've been told I better keep talking. So, Madam Chair, it's not going to happen, and it's really too bad. You know? So, back to the President of Michelin North America. Well, he said, in the Minister of Labor's November 24th letter to the Chronicle Herald, Minister Moore suggested first contract arbitration is very attractive to people wanting to invest or expand their business in Nova Scotia.
Order, please. If the member would be so kind, I've had a request for an introduction. Do you mind? You okay with that? Thank you. I now recognize the honourable member for Kings South. Sorry, Kings North.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to draw the attention of members to the East Gallery. My friend Don Fraser is in the gallery today. He's in Halifax on business, and Don practices law in Kentville. He's an active participant in community life in Kings County. He's been active in politics since the 1970s as an organizer, as a candidate, and certainly these days as a mentor. And Don is certainly very important in my life these days as well, because he's the president of the Kings North NDP Riding Association. So welcome to the House, Don, and I hope everybody will give him a warm welcome.
I welcome all visitors to the gallery today. I hope you enjoy today's committee. I now recognize the honourable member for Inverness.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I wonder if I went up to visit that fine gentleman in the gallery, if I might be able to get him to convince his member to change his opinion on Bill 102. I don't know. I doubt it. I'm seeing heads saying no. So, you know, Madam Chair, I'm laughing, but, you know, I'll go back to the point I was making here. In the Minister of Labor's November 24th letter to the Chronicle Herald, Minister Moore suggested first contract arbitration is very attractive to people wanting to invest or expand their business in Nova Scotia. So, Madam Chair, do the members opposite really think that that's true? I'm hearing one yes. There's not a lot of conviction there. I think I heard a second yes. The question was, there was a statement made by Minister Moore that suggested first contract arbitration is very attractive to people wanting to invest or expand their business in Nova Scotia. I'm wondering if the members opposite think that that's a true statement. I'm hearing a lot of silence. I've heard it without a doubt. Well, Madam Chair, let me tell you what the President of Michelin North America said about that statement. Nothing could be farther from the truth. That pretty much hits the nail on the head. So nothing could be farther from the truth, he said. So when it comes to first contract arbitration, the one thing that Nova Scotians can count on in all of this is being fooled again by this government. So, and I talked last night, Madam Chair, about not wanting to get fooled again, and that great George W. Bush quote that always amuses me: "Fool me once, shame on me. Fool me twice, won't get fooled again." But he had some great one-liners, Madam Chair. Some great one-liners. But, you know, sadly, Madam Chair, my fear is that we got fooled on Bill 100. We got fooled on the Labour Management Review Committee. We got fooled on when we were told they're not going to be making decisions about things that are going to affect non-unionized workplaces. All the private businesses in the province from all the sectors came into law amendments, said no, that's not the case. So they've been fooled. I'm just wondering when we're going to get fooled again. In this series of getting fooled events. So, Madam Chair, you know, I think the government's intention with Bill 102, with this legislation, there may have been a goal to better redistribute wealth to workers. But in my mind, it attacks the wrong people, because ultimately it's attacking companies like Michelin. Sobeys was in, they made their comments. But it also attacks a lot of other businesses around the province. Now, one could pull out a list of their local members of their area chamber of commerce. Those are the people that this legislation attacks, Madam Chair. You know, and if we want jobs for Nova Scotians, members in this legislature, each of us must make sure that Nova Scotia has a government that understands the importance of helping these businesses to be competitive. Whether that's the taxes that they face, whether it's the labor costs that they face, whether it might be trade regulations they face. You know, we heard from the Canadian exporters that a predominant portion of more than the fair share of the GDP, let me back up, the GDP, the productivity of the province, that the exporters were a greater contributor on average than any other sector of the economy, companies that export. And I remember a figure of about 16% of the GDP of the province is due to exporting. I may be way off on that, so I think I better retract that one, Madam Chair. I'm trying to remember these figures from about a week and a half ago, but my point is this. You know, these companies are competing in a global marketplace where they don't need the government coming in or an arbitrator coming in and telling them, you know, what their cost structure should be, what they should be paying their workers and whatnot. They know that all too well, and they have to sharpen their pencil to stay alive, to be able to compete, to be able to keep the business going, to pay the wages, to keep the jobs here in Nova Scotia. And my point is this: if we looked at this legislation in a pure sense, as a tool to help greater unionization of workplaces in the province, and if, let's say, every workplace in the province became unionized and everybody's wages went up 50 or 60%, you know, everybody'd be happy for a short while until you'd go to try to sell those products and services that were procured through those new terms. And, you know, I don't know, Madam Chair. I raised the question in law amendments, you know, would the government then want to set up trade regulations to try to restrict, I don't know, people who are importing goods into Canada or into Nova Scotia? Because you'd pretty much need, with this bill, you'd pretty much need some kind of anti-free trade or tariffs, protectionary measures to try to block off competitors, because our companies could no longer compete with imported goods or services. because our cost structure should be totally out of whack. So we would have to put up protective measures, much like I think we had about 100 years ago. You know, we were protecting other countries from trying to import things into Canada. And they were, of course, exporting, and we were importing into the country. So, you know, if we're going to completely change the cost structures of companies in Nova Scotia, which all the companies that came to law amendment said that that could very well happen, we're also going to need some kind of protectionary measures like tariffs to make goods coming into the province more expensive, so that when you go down to the store, you know, if you're a Nova Scotian working under the new terms, you might have a bigger paycheck, but you're also going to pay a lot more for everything you buy. Now, I don't know, you might be better off at the end of the day, we don't really know. But I tell you, if we got rid of things like free trade, you can kiss goodbye markets like the United States, which has 10 times as many people as our own country. So, Madam Chair, why would we like to get rid of a market where we can be selling Nova Scotia products and services that's 10 times bigger than our own country's market? We'd have to get rid of that. In a pure sense, if you pass this legislation, and that's exactly what I'd be asking you. If you pass this legislation, you know, and you're changing the cost structure for businesses, you're encouraging unionization, and this is what the employers told us. This is not what I'm saying. And well, I'm trying to represent the people who came to law amendments, the employers of the province. But apparently the members opposite think those people are crazy. And I don't think they're crazy. I think we're glad. I think we're very lucky to have them. But we'd have to get rid of free trade if we were going to try to make the products that we'd make in Nova Scotia competitive. If we carry forth in this legislation, and if we carry down the line of thinking that's gone into the legislation. Because, Madam Chair, there is absolutely no regard for these companies and their ability to decide themselves based on the environment they're competing in. There's no regard for that. This is a matter of government putting in place a labor management review committee that's tilted in favor of labor, organized labor. And, you know, the government wants these people making decisions.
John can't take any more.
And we, look, Madam Chair, I've knocked one into submission. So, Madam Chair, I don't think what I'm saying is crazy at all. I mean, this is just, this is the reality of the legislation we're looking at here. And it's too bad. It's too bad. So, you know, and I've said it already, you know, I've said that there's nothing wrong with the government, you know, wanting to have a goal of redistributing wealth. But, you know, why not help to make Nova Scotia businesses more profitable so that they can pay more higher wages, so that we raise everybody's ship, you know? Wouldn't that be a more laudable goal for the government to have? Because this bill is really about trying to extract wealth, to redistribute it, but trying to extract it out of the hands of hardworking small business owners in Nova Scotia. And you know, Madam Chair, I'm really wondering if there's any money to extract there. A lot of these people that own these businesses, you know, have worked hard all their life. They may be suffering now. Their businesses, they may have difficulty even selling them. So instead of having a lump sum at the end of their days, you know, to sell their business and have a lump sum to come out and use as their income for retirement, they may be dependent on previous earnings. If they can't sell their business, or if they can only sell it for a fraction of what it's worth, they're going to be dependent on all the money they saved over the years when they were probably working 60, 70, maybe even 80-hour weeks, time away from their families. Does this government care about them? I don't think so. with the actions of Bill 102, with the actions of ignoring the presentations before the Law Amendments Committee, I don't think the government cares about those people. But they're quite happy to listen to all the people that they pointed to the Labour Management Review Committee. But I stand corrected, because really the consensus out of the Labour Management Review Committee was not to put forward this legislation. So the government doesn't even want to listen to the committee, but they want to listen to certain people on the committee. And that's sad, Madam Chair. And you know, I think members should go out and maybe job shadow with some of these people that own businesses. See what it's like. See what it's like to run a business. You know, we often think these people are rich, or that you know, they have something that we don't have. But in a lot of cases, they're just hardworking people. They're different people. They're different because they're smaller in number, certainly. And you could take, you know, take a group of 20 or 30 people, and you could probably pick maybe 2 or 3 people who would be entrepreneurs, successful entrepreneurs. But their outlook on life is very different than the average person. They're risk takers. And being a risk taker, you know, there's a chance that they could fail. And a lot of businesses fail. Sometimes, you know, a person might fail 5 times before they have a success. And I'm sure, I don't know if the Minister of Economic Development might be able to help me out, but I think that a lot of entrepreneurs statistically fail about 5 times before they have their first success. And, you know, a lot of businesses fail. But you know what, Madam Chair, a lot of those people, the entrepreneurs in our province, most of us would get down and would give up. But these are special people. They'll keep going and they'll keep trying, and thank God they do, because when they try, they end up creating jobs for people. They end up creating jobs for the people that might not have that same, whatever you want to call it, Madam Chair, whether it's skills, whether it's aptitude, whether it's pure gut instincts or a drive. But thankfully, we have people like that in the province. We should be passing legislation in here that encourages people like that, and that helps to bring along other people like that. So that instead of having, you know, 5 failures for every success, maybe we nail that down to 4 failures for every success. We make it a little bit easier. So maybe on the 4th time, the person has a success. Because how many times does maybe the person get to the 4th try, fail, and give up? And we heard it from a representative from Sobeys who came in and said, you know, this bill is damaging, but it's most damaging in the sense that there's going to be a lot of businesses that may never set up here, or that may look at the environment here, look at their checklist of what they want to see, and see something like first contract arbitration, say, no, we're not going to bother setting up in Nova Scotia. But Madam Chair, we'll never even know who those companies are, because the decisions will be made in an office setting somewhere far away from here, in a very impersonal way. So instead of doing things and passing laws in this legislature to help business, you know, here we are, we're talking about Bill 102, something that the employers don't want, and it looks like it's going to be passed. Madam Chair, how much time do I have left? 10 minutes. So, you know, Madam Chair, you know, I don't think this bill is about redistributing wealth. I think it could lead to closure of more businesses in the province. And that's what we've been told by business owners who've come to present at law amendments. I think if, of course, of those businesses, if we lose business, that means lost jobs for Nova Scotians. People are already struggling enough right now. There's families losing jobs already. There's extended families, seniors in the province, retired people in the province taking cuts to their pensions because of the state of the world economy. I certainly see it in my area with New Page. You know, so to me, this legislation can only lead to closure of more business, lost jobs, and really the export of wealth. Not the redistribution of wealth, but the export of wealth. So I guess, Madam Chair, time will tell. Time will tell. And I guess Nova Scotians will have their say in the next election. But I do think this will be one thing that Nova Scotians will remember. And I know where I stand on it. And I've stood in this legislature a number of times and spoken on it. And I know that I've got a lot of small business owners back home, particularly in the Strait area, who have said, I had one gentleman write, and he said, Alan, I heard you speak today, and I agree with everything you said. So if I'm coming to the legislature to represent Inverness, and I have somebody from home saying that, Madam Chair, I feel like I've come to work and I've done my work for the day. Sometimes we wonder, I think, in the legislature, if what we're doing is actually adding value sometimes, because we're here for long hours. We may speak for a certain period of time. Sometimes we wonder, are we really contributing? But when I hear something like that, that tells me if I'm representing somebody in my area, when I go to the polls in the next election, I'm going to be proud to shake that man's hand and to know that, you know what, I did right by him. And I'm going to encourage all the members opposite to think about that. Think about these people who are important in your constituencies, and to think about what they have to say when it comes your time to stand here in the legislature and cast your vote, because it will be a recorded vote, and everyone will know on that day and from that day forward who you stood with. Did you stand with the Labour Management Review Committee and the members tilted in favor of Labour, or did you stand with the people who create jobs in this province? With that, Madam Chair, I will conclude my remarks. Thank you.
Thank you. I recognize the honourable leader of the official opposition.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm pleased to join and rise in the debate on Bill 102, an act to prevent unnecessary labour disruptions and protect the economy, Madam Chair. First of all, I want to speak to the member from Inverness and congratulate him on his remarks. And if Michelin is going to expand in Nova Scotia, I want to make sure he understands that the constituency of Annapolis will be looking for them to arrive in our community and not only provide the good jobs that they provide, but to be a good corporate citizen that they have been not only in that community, but across Nova Scotia. They are one of the major sponsors of Special Olympics across Nova Scotia. And I get an opportunity to attend that event, as many members do, what a difference they've made, not only in the lives of those young athletes, but in the lives of those families and communities. And that's just one example of the work that they do, the work that Sobeys has done. All of us can, I'm sure, recite from our own constituencies. I know when I was a hockey coach, before I became a politician, Sobeys were sponsoring uniforms, not just for hockey, but across other sports. Tim Hortons. Without the commitment from those good corporate citizens, many of our communities, the fibre of a lot of our communities, would be very different. And what's so great about them, quite frankly, is that it's not just where the plant is located. They have contributed across Nova Scotia in every community, because their workers go all across this province. There's a plant in the valley in Waterville that I know is in the edge of the member from Kings West, and butts on Kings South, but many of those workers spread from one end of Nova Scotia. The majority of them are in Kings South, Kings North, but there's a good number of them who live in Kings West, and some as far down as Bridgetown and Annapolis Royal, who travel each day. And that corporation has not forgotten where their employees come from. They've not forgotten what it means to their employees' families to make sure that they contribute and work with them. And they have not forgotten that they have a responsibility to the entire province of Nova Scotia, not just the one where their plant is. And as I was in Pictou on Sunday in an event, and I was speaking to some members from the Michelin family, and the story was the same. And I'm sure in the Strait area you feel that. There are probably members now who work from the Strait who come down and work in the Granton plant, and your community and community. So I think we always need to bear in mind, and I think that's one of the reasons why when they speak...
Order, please. I would remind the member that I believe he should be speaking, making his remarks to the chair as opposed to a particular member. Thank you.
I'm sure I'll be more than happy to do that.
I recognize the honourable leader of the official opposition.
You all continue my conversation with the member from Inverness. I want to thank him for his remarks and the fact that he spoke about Michelin and the fact that not only are they contributing into the Granton area and Waterville and in Lunenburg County, but their reach spreads well beyond that into their employment and the people they hire, and to have them come forward and the way they did in law amendments was quite remarkable. You know, we've had a bill in this House, and one of the bills that was talked about, and I know the Premier has mentioned the bill called the Michelin Bill, and even when that bill was being introduced, Michelin was not at the legislature. It is not something that they traditionally do. I think we'd be hard pressed to find a time in their history in our province when they were here before a committee. I think that would hold true as well for Sobeys and Clearwater, all of whom are major employers in Nova Scotia. And they came forward expressing some real concerns that they have about Bill 102 and the impact that it will have, they believe, will have on their business. Madam Chair, I believe in this bill is really a bill that is against collective bargaining. It takes away the right of one party to negotiate freely and openly on a first contract. It's been said in this House by the Premier a number of times that 80% of Canadians already fall under this legislation. Chair, that's not true. I mean, to quote the Premier, that is simply not true. There are 4% of Canadians who fall under the first contract arbitration model that we're talking about here in this bill. It's often referred to in this House and outside, quite frankly, as the Manitoba model, which moves away, and it's really interesting. There's, as I'm sure most members of this House, there's a number of first contract arbitration models that are being instituted across the country. There's a different one. I think the Ontario-Quebec models are pretty close. The federal government has a different model. But the only province in the country, only government, I should say, because that would include the federal government, that has the type of first contract arbitration that we're going to introduce is Manitoba. And the big difference in the legislation from how it would impact on the day is quite frankly, when first contract is introduced, when a company is certified, it's really like a clock ticking. A number of days disappear, regardless of what's happened at the bargaining table, regardless of what's going on, and it then gets sent off to a third party to kind of settle the separations, the differences that may be there. In the other forms of first contract arbitration that are being displayed or being used by the federal government, being used in Ontario and in Quebec and in some other provinces, in order to get to the arbitration part, one of the two parties has to apply and prove that someone has been bargaining in bad faith. That seems like what would be a reasonable model for Nova Scotia. What's been interesting, while many of the presenters came to law amendments, and even labor leaders who came in, there were a few who were pushing heavily for the Manitoba model, but some of them were just speaking about first contract arbitration. As a matter of fact, whatever the model looked like was okay with them. Employers who came in who said, we're against first contract arbitration, regardless of what it looks like, then said, but if you're going to have first contract arbitration, we believe there's a more moderate model, one that the majority of Canadians fall under. And that is the model where you have to prove somebody is bargaining in bad faith, as well as it gives the Labour Board a little more authority to be able to force people back to the table, to be able to bring mediation in, to be able to, it gives them some power. It doesn't take away the bargaining rights of either of the two parties. It actually becomes a mediator, in some cases, forces them back to the table to try to find what is a solution for what is causing the deal not to be made. Today in question period, the Premier also said that 15% of Nova Scotians are already under first contract arbitration, and that's not accurate either. There is no Nova Scotian who is under first contract arbitration. There are, though, Nova Scotians who have negotiated away the right to strike for arbitration. That has happened collectively at the table. That has been negotiated at different times, that people have made the chance to sit down and say, we believe, I know some police forces here in the province are bargained away the right to strike for a period of time. It's my understanding that the member from Cape Breton South was working with some first responders in Cape Breton to also move away from taking away the right to strike in Nova Scotia. And it comes back to trying to strike what is a balance for both employers and employees. And what's been really interesting in this entire conversation, law amendments, when they talked about, and I think every presenter was asked the question about, what problem are we trying to fix? Why are you bringing in the first contract arbitration? And it was interesting. No one really seemed to have a good answer for that, because there have been 13 cases that had gone before, 3 cases that had gone before the Labour Management Board in the last 14 years, I think, roughly 14 years, all of which had been settled, all of which were presented because somebody had been bargaining in bad faith. The mechanism worked when it was triggered. The employees were protected. The employer was protected. And whichever party was bargaining in bad faith, they were immediately corrected by what is the safety net there, that the ability to go to the Labour Management Board to ask for an arbitrator. The other interesting thing in one of the presentations was there was a union who brought in a number of, I think there were 3 of them, who had been actually tied up in a long time about getting contracts settled. And when asked who their employer was, it was the government. It was rather interesting that the examples that was brought forward by the union leadership about someone bargaining in bad faith, or the reason that we need first contract arbitration, the example of a bad employer, it was the government of Nova Scotia. Well, I don't know that because we're trying to correct the way the government negotiates with their employees, whether we should burden every other private sector employer with the same piece of legislation, when it appears the mechanism that we have in place has been working and working well. And that those employees are served well, and so are the employers. One of the other interesting aspects of first contract is, all of us know, usually negotiating a first contract is the most difficult one in lots of times, because both have a lot at stake. Both have a lot, it's kind of their starting point. It's in their best interest, and I think in this province we've seen a great history of employers and employees that once they're certified, have working quite well together to make sure that there is no labor disruption, to make sure that that they can continue to operate inside of this province, and the decisions that they each make are made in the parameters of what is fair to both parties. I realize that when we move to first contract arbitration, which is the Manitoba model, which automatically allows it to go into an arbitrator very quickly, you can see why employers become very nervous. very, very quickly about, you know, it's very difficult to find someone who can come in and you know, and actually know what happens in some of these businesses. I mean, you have, I'm sure many members of this House have been given the privilege to tour Michelin. I know some members have them in their communities that go through. And what's really interesting in this province is to look at how integrated those three plants are within inside of the Nova Scotia context. And then looking at how these three plants are integrated into the North America context of Michelin. So to have someone who's going to come in to negotiate or to settle a labor dispute, how are they at all going to know what it means to this company and what it would mean in terms of the context of their global operation? And it is important to know that some of Michelin's operations are unionized. It's important to know that some aspects of, I believe Clearwater has, I think it was stated in their submission they did, that part of their operation was is unionized. What their issue was around the first contract and immediately going into arbitration. We made, and they made some suggestions on things that could do, that they believe would go a long way to improve this piece of legislation that would allow employers, employees to operate. One of their fears, quite honestly, is that this bill, the Manitoba bill, is really not about their workers. It is really about certification, making it easier to certify. And you know, it's hard to argue with that. It is extremely difficult to argue with the fact that an organizer could go into their operation and say, you know, don't worry. You will keep all of the same benefits you have now. We may be able to improve them. We may be able to get you a bit more. And by the way, you won't have to strike. That's a much different context than when you walk into an employer's operation and say, here's what you have. We may be able to improve them. If we can't, there's a potential that we could have a labor disruption. That's a very different circumstances than it is because really there's no risk at this point on certifying on the first contract if we immediately go to arbitration. It tilts the balance. It takes away what has been a very effective and workable labor relations inside of the province of Nova Scotia. Our caucus was very pleased to stand with healthcare workers along with the governing party today when they were in opposition about making sure that Bill 1 didn't pass, because we felt it was important that they should have the right to strike if they saw fit. It was part of their negotiating tool with their employer, which in many cases is the government of Nova Scotia. So it was their bargaining tool. And the government, when they were in opposition, believed that as well, believed that healthcare workers should have the right to strike. We agree with that. But if we believe on the idea that they should have the right to strike because it keeps their employer in check, because it allows them their negotiation to be equal at the table, well, let's flip that around to first contract arbitration when it comes to an employer who has an employees whose demands they can't meet. It should be their right to allow the lockout. It should be their right to allow the union to go on strike, force them to strike if they want to. Under the existing rules and changes, what we have here is that we really have tilted that balance. And we, as a caucus, understand government has the numbers. This bill is passing. Let's not kid ourselves. This bill is passing, and we know that. What we've attempted to do is to try to find a middle ground here. What would still allow the government to speak to the commitments they have made to whoever about getting first contract arbitration through, and still allow the business community to feel a little bit of at ease around first contract arbitration. And really, I want to call it the certification bill, because that's what this bill is about. It's not really about improving the lives of Nova Scotian workers. It's really about certifying for the numbers inside of the union. And as been said, I'm one of a few, a number of my siblings have been on negotiating teams, looking to settle contracts. My father was one of the signatories of the IBW, ironically, when he was in alignment with Nova Scotia Power, because unions have a place. Employees have, and employers, employees, and members of our community should have someone who protects them, someone who is their global voice when it comes to dealing with workplace issues, when it comes to negotiating contracts, when it comes to negotiating not just wages, but other aspects of employment. But we should also have, and I think employers should have the right to be able to work inside of that context to protect their own businesses. Many of them have risked it all. They've risked their entire life's investment into a particular company. I know we heard from a number of people from Pictou County, Wellware was one of them. He was very articulate, very direct. Mr. McLean, and my understanding is he's a former member of this House at one point. He was very articulate and very direct about what would happen if this bill is brought in and his company becomes certified. And what I think what bothers and was galling most of these employers, it was the issue of you are taking away my ability to negotiate. If my employees want to certify and become registered, that's their business. That's their right. And we should respect that right. But at the same time, you have to allow the employer to negotiate with those employees. It's what keeps the balance is at the teeter-totter level. So it makes sure that when you go to the table, everyone is there. We've all seen cases where one side or the other's had the hammer, and it's not been good. It's not been good. So why would we create a situation where that balance gets tilted? And I think it's important that when we discuss this bill and it goes out from committee of the whole to third reading, that remember the very bill we're talking about is talking about the Manitoba model of first contract arbitration, which represents 4% of the Canadian population. And it is important that we do not confuse those with the other models that are being used in other provinces, which, quite frankly, Madam Chair, seem to have worked fairly well without the kind of disruption that you know has been talked about. Because employers and employees, if certification happens, employer-employees still have the ability to negotiate as equals at the table, not as being tilted. And in this province, we are going to tilt the balance towards certification and, quite frankly, towards a first contract settlement. That may not be in the best interest of a particular business and, quite frankly, may not be in the best interest of employees. You know, at some point, an employer you know, we've seen cases where companies have come in. We just saw one in the South Shore in Bowater, where a company came in and pitted neighbor against neighbor. That's not fair. It's not right. But they did it. You know, when we were across at law amendments and we were looking at and listening to the changes, it was interesting to hear, because I like, we looked at first contract arbitration across the country. recognizing, and our fear, quite frankly, was that we would move to where we are now, which is the Manitoba model. We were hoping that if government was going to proceed with it, it would be more towards the Ontario federal government model, where you have to prove somebody's bargaining in bad faith. But I really thought when we went from here to law amendments, and that we were going to hear unions digging in on the Manitoba model is the only model that works. It's the one we're going to take. It's the one we want. That's it. And we're going to have employers come in and say, we don't want anything. First contract arbitration, we don't want it. We don't need it. All of those things. Well, we've yet to hear an explanation on why we need it in Nova Scotia. It was quite refreshing and welcoming in law amendments to hear a number of the union leaders talking about first contract without the Manitoba model. And quite frankly, listening to business owners talking about, well, if we're going to have it, let's take a moderate approach to this. And if nothing else, I think from our own collective perspectives here, when we look at if one of those businesses are to certify, that should reassure all of us that there will probably be no labor disruption, because the very two people there, the union leaders and the leaders of the companies, are very much on the same page. They very much are on the same page. Whether you're a member of a local or union, or whether or not you're the owner of a company, you're going to do your best to prevent a labor disruption. But you need to be able to. The minister asked how I could keep going. Now listen, there was lots of people sitting around our dinner table. We didn't stop eating when milk got spilled. there was but it was refreshing and reassuring that so many of them recognized. But I thought it was important, and I think it's important for all of us to recognize how both the employer and the union leaders at this point who were there both recognize they're in this together. So when I went in, was thinking about that and trying to listen to what people were saying, and I'm still trying to come to the point why we have settled on first contract arbitration, the Manitoba model version. Why we're not flexible enough to say, well, let's take a model that it appears we could get a greater acceptance of, one that would probably work better for our province. And I think we might have arrived at that quite frankly, before we got to the House. If we had, asked union leaders and non-union employers to sit down. Imagine what might have happened if we'd asked, Michelin, Sobeys, Clearwater, the large employers in the province, some small business people across Nova Scotia, not the people who represent them, but the very people who were there, to sit down with the union leaders and say, listen, we believe the government believes first contract arbitration is a good thing. They're bringing it in. What can we do to make it work for both of you? And I think if they had sat down together, we would have a very different piece of legislation in front of us than we do today. I don't think either one of them are stuck on the Manitoba model. And we're trying to find out why the government is. And I think it would show a level of respect for both parties who sat in law amendments if we were to compromise and find the middle ground, which, quite honestly, Mr. Chair, happens at every collective bargaining table. They find some middle ground. How does this work? How do we prevent if everyone dug in their own positions? If everyone dug in their own positions, we would have strikes. And a member showed it across all the more reason to have arbitration, and I agree with him. That's why we have law amendments. That's our form of arbitration, to listen to people. And like I said earlier, and I know the good member was listening to me, when I said union leaders and employers were pretty, they're pretty close. If we actually took some time and backed away from this piece of legislation and read the comments that were made in law amendments, we would be surprised how close both might be on this bill. There would be some changes, but I think ones that both could live with, and the minister would be able to introduce first contract arbitration, just not the model that we presented to Nova Scotians at first reading. We often amend bills in this House because people come before law amendments and they make a presentation. They often tell us where the rubber meets the road, and that's not a Michelin pun at all, but they often tell us what it means to implement it. And I've often thought as a group, we pass an awful lot of legislation. You wonder, you hope you're getting the best information, you're making decisions, you're impacting other people, the people who have to implement this stuff. But at the end of the day, when it becomes law and we implement it, what happens? Does it do what we intended it to do? And the great thing about law amendments is we get an opportunity for people to come in to look at a piece of legislation and then say to us, this is what will happen in our view if the bill is not changed. So I would encourage, and I know the minister is looking for to have first contract arbitration move forward. I know she has, in my experience sitting with her on this side of the House, and I know in her experience in her community work has been a person who has found the middle ground and worked together with different organizations to find what is a workable solution for the majority of people. And I hope that we continue to proceed down this debate. We look for a solution that is for the majority of Nova Scotians, not the majority of us in this House. So there is, and I think there can be some middle ground. I would encourage her to look at and reach out to the very Labour Management Board that she asked to look at this first contract arbitration and ask them why they were uncertain that it wasn't unanimous that we should have. And I think, to be fair to them, I don't think they said we shouldn't have first contract arbitration. I think what we might find is they probably said we shouldn't have this model of first contract arbitration. But I don't know that. I'm just guessing. But I would encourage the minister to ask the members who were on that committee what reservations they had, because it was split, 4-4, I believe. What reservations they had about first contract arbitration. Was it they were against it completely, or that they were against the Manitoba model? And I think we as a House might be surprised about what we would find out. And it would be encouraging. And I know and I hope that the minister will do that, because quite honestly, I know I've had the opportunity to travel the province a fair bit. As I said earlier, I was in Antigonish-Pictou on Sunday. I can tell you this piece of legislation came up a lot. Interestingly enough, I was in my riding on Friday night to open a provincial Tier 2 volleyball provincials in Middleton Regional High School. And it was teams from all over the province. But I had a constituent of mine come up to me. She's a healthcare provider, but her husband works for Michelin. And she said to me, what is happening with first contract arbitration? And I said, it looks like there will be no compromise. It looks like we're going to get the model. And her response to me was, I don't want to have to move to the United States. And I found that rather interesting. I hadn't spoken to her about this piece of legislation, but obviously the employees at that company recognize when their president shows up at the Province House and ends up on the front page of the Herald, something's not right, and some concerns are there. And they recognize that when, the largest employer in the province, Sobeys, is raising some serious concerns about this bill as it stands, that there may be something to this. When I was in on the law amendments and listening, I listened to Colin MacDonald speak from Clearwater. It was interesting, first of all, at the beginning of his presentation, for him to describe his company, or the company, and where it is, not only in Canada and North America, but globally, and how those companies are connected. And I was thinking to myself, how fortunate we are when Michelin comes in and says we've got 18 plants in North America, 1 in Mexico, 14 in the United States, and 3 in Canada. But those 3 in Canada are in our province. How lucky we are. Sobeys, who has really a national company, has staying in Nova Scotia. Strategically, it's probably not the closest place for them to deliver goods across our nation, but they stay here because they believe in Nova Scotian workers, they believe in our province, and quite frankly, I believe they think that home is where they should be operating and running a business. And I was listening to Clearwater express and explain how their operation was connected. And thinking to myself, all of those employers could be somewhere else. All of them could go elsewhere. And you're thinking, and I don't want to, I'm not saying they're going to go somewhere this bill goes past as it is. But I thought to myself how lucky we are that those entrepreneurs, that they not only took the risk to grow their businesses and grow them in Nova Scotia, but they decided to stay here. They decided to stay here to employ our brothers and sisters, our children, to give them an opportunity to live in Nova Scotia. And I'm thinking, so wouldn't it make sense that we find a way to ask them, and government has, and particularly majority government, has the right to bring in legislation they believe is going to move our province forward. We disagree on this particular piece of legislation, but they have the right to do that. But before you would do that, it would be helpful, I think, to go out to those employers who are going to be the most impacted by this. And in particular, when you think about this for a second, those employers are Nova Scotians. Those employers are Nova Scotians and have done everything possible to keep the majority of their operation here in Nova Scotia. Look at the Bragg operation in Cumberland. They have lands in the U.S. Harvest blueberries in the U.S. There's a lot in Cumberland County and Colchester County and in other parts of Nova Scotia, particularly in those 2 counties. They've invested a lot. They have Eastlink, which is headquartered here. That's all because they have a belief in this province. I believe they have, and I refer to it as an ancestral tie to Nova Scotia. It's where I believe they believe their ancestors will want them to grow. And they do that because that connection, they do that because we have good employees, and they do that because we've had a relative peace when it comes to worker and employer relations in the province of Nova Scotia. And what was also interesting to hear some of them say was that they already deal with unionization and unions in some parts of their operation. So why we wouldn't have gone out to them and said, listen, we're bringing in first contract arbitration. We want you to think about this, look at the models across the country, here's what the differences is, talk to us about them, and tell us how it's going to matter to you, if it matters at all to your operation. And we should have done the same to the leaders of the unions. And I believe we would have ended up with a piece of legislation, quite frankly, that would have gone through this House very quickly. Because they all would have come to the realization, first, A, that there's legislation going through the House, and B, it's in their collective best interest to have an impact to help shape it. It kind of reminds you of what it means to have open, free collective bargaining. Put two parties down at the table, and you say, work it out. They lay out their positions, and then negotiate. At the end of the day, neither one usually ends up with everything they want, but they leave the bargaining table content that the process had happened, and content that their rights are protected, content they can continue to operate their business, and content that we as an economy can continue to move forward. When you look at what's happening to our the economy of Nova Scotia, we've debated in this House, disagreed a lot on numbers being tossed around. I think there's one thing all of us can probably agree on, and that is there is a level of uncertainty, and it's not just about